Today's episode is sponsored by the Costumes Rental Corporation.
Welcome to Designing Hollywood Podcast. I'm your host, Phillip Boutté Jr. Today's episode is sponsored by Costume Rental Corporation, CRC Costumes. Designing Hollywood is a podcast show. It's dedicated to all things movies, the movie industry, and its industry professionals. Today's guest is one of Hollywood's most respected costume designers with 4 Oscar nominations to her name for Philip Kaufmann's Quills, David Fincher's The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu's The Revenant, and Denis Villeneuve's Dune. She is also Terrence Malick's go-to costume designer after a recommendation from his longtime production designer Jack Fisk, working with him on The New World, The Tree of Life, To the Wonder, and Knight of Cups, while other credits include Stephen Norrington's The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which I love, Ben Affleck's Argo, and Martin Scorsese's latest film, Killers of the Flower Moon. She is a creative powerhouse, fiercely accurate, authentic, genuine, and always a pleasure to be around and to chat with. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome 4-time Oscar-nominated costume designer Jacqueline West back to the Designing Hollywood show. Welcome, Jacqueline. Thank you so much for joining me.
I'm so happy to be here, Philip, and I'm glad you gave CRC a shout out. It's a wonderful costume house where I've had my office for many, many years.
Love them so much, and I appreciate you being here and also calling out CRC. So I want to get started. We normally start with just like kind of basic questions just in case our audience is new so they can get to know you a little better. So for the boring questions, it would just be, do you have a moment or do you remember where you were like, this is what I want to do, or costume design is the thing? Like, how did that come about?
I remember, yes, I did have a moment. I was a fashion designer, and I was showing my clothing collection at the Pret-a-Porter in Paris, and I got a call from my office to call Philip Kaufmann's office in San Francisco. And I did, and they said, you've got to call him at his office on the Rue Marbeuf in Paris. He's there doing Henry and June, and he wants to talk to you. So I did, and I made a date to meet with him and his wife at a restaurant in Opera called Bauta. And we sat there and we had this wonderful dinner. He never said anything. And I didn't want to bring it up. I was shy, And this is his famous big director, The Right Stuff, Unbearable Lightness of Being. And his wife said, ask her. And he said, will you come and work on Henry and June with us? And they had written it together, and it was really, I knew, a very important project for them both. Mm-hmm. And he was a very good friend of my husband's. She's passed away since, but she became one of my very closest, dearest friends, very close to both of them. And I said, sure, I finish at the Pret-a-Porter next week. And I said, but I have to get back. I'm opening a new store in San Francisco. And he says, no. He said, we'll fly you back and forth if you'll work on this with us. And he gave me a beautiful apartment on the Rue Vavin across from Picasso's old studio. And just a 360-degree view of Paris and a driver and $1 million French francs, and said, just start. He said, you know more about Anna East Nin than anyone I know. I'd read all her journals twice. I'd met her when I was a student at Berkeley. And I was walking down the street on his way to the Rue Marbeuf to show him things and drawings that I did for her house in Louveciennes and for her what I thought she should look like. He had a designer on it. She was French, but I don't think he was completely happy. He wanted some take that might have been a little different for her. And although that designer, I just loved her work, and the movie ended up beautifully. My credit was overall artistic consultant to the director on sets, set dressing, items of clothing, hat boxes that she would have owned, that kind of thing. So I spent a lot of time at the Marché Malick at Clignancourt. And walking into his office, I thought, this is fun. I might want to do this. But I had this full-on clothing company. I had my own department in Barney's, and it seemed very, very far away. At the end of the movie, I went back, opened my store in San Francisco, and I had a store in Berkeley next to Chez Benise. At the end, I got a call, after the movie was done. He says, come to Lucasfilm. We're going to be editing the movie. I want you to see the things you found in the movie. And then he said, the next movie I do, I want you to design it. But I wasn't in the union or anything. And, that seemed very, very far away. But he was a powerful director and got Sean Connery involved on Rising Sun. And there I was. I was in the film business. And I didn't wind down my clothing company till after I got nominated for Quills about 8 years later. It was my second movie. And I was nominated. And I started getting a lot of offers from agents and from directors who loved the look of the movie. And that's what Jack Fisk saw when he recommended me was Quills to Terrence Malick.
That's incredible. So it was just kind of like this whole, like kind of getting swept up in the moment.
It was serendipitous. I mean, it was Phil Kaufmann, my husband, James, who was good friends with Phil, telling him I could do this. And I said, I don't know if I can do this. He said, you were running a really big clothing company. You can do this.
That and also your design sensibilities.
My mother was a fashion designer, and I was an art history major, so I'm used to looking at brush strokes, details, drapery folds. You have to identify a painting by the smallest little drapery folds or the smallest little brush stroke in art history. So you get very detail oriented, and I've always thought that costuming was all in the details.
Question for you. We touched on this the last time I talked, but I just want to bring it up because it was one of the coolest things. And I want to see if you still kind of do it. I got to work with Jacqueline on the social network really quickly, and you had set up the space, the workspace, to feel the way that it was when they were doing Facebook. Do you still do that in your own workspaces now? Like, where you kind of set them up to evoke a feeling?
I do. With Killers of the Flower Moon, I had Julie O'Keefe with me, and she brought to me the most incredible items that we could decorate our office with. And we didn't make a lodge, but we had necklaces, we had otter hats, and an actual otter skins, and all the stuff that things were made from. But mainly my office was filled with research boards on this one, because I wanted to be really authentic. So I made these 10-foot tall, 4-foot wide research boards that covered all the different aspects of the movie. And there were many, all the artisans, blacksmiths, shopkeepers, modern Osage wearing 1920s clothing, modern Osage that wore still many traditional items, and then traditional Osage women, traditional Osage men, guardians, bankers, townspeople, cowboys, ranchers. And we just lined all the walls with them. So it wasn't quite like I did on Social Network, where I recreated Mark Zuckerberg's room at Harvard. This was a little bit more complex, and it was such a bigger world, it wasn't four guys creating one of the biggest first apps, but it was many, many people involved on many layers, the good guys, the bad guys, the protagonists, just the onlookers, parades people, the war mothers. It was so vast that I didn't create just a room, but we did create this doll, a traditional Osage woman.
That's incredible.
Leggings and the trade cloth and the Osage blouse. It's a little miniature Osage grandmother.
That's amazing.
We had a lot of stuff like that. We had sections of the workroom that were I had a wonderful specialty costumer who really learned how to do finger weaving. We tried to enlist as many Osage people to do their crafts, that their specialty crafts. Like Julie referred to them as kitchen artists, where they did beautiful ribbon work at home, finger weaving. But then it was so massive, all the fringe on all the blankets, we did it in-house. Pendleton made us maybe 1,000 blankets. They replicated all the blankets. There's a big panoramic shot I had up in my office of all the Osage going to Washington, D.C. And we made 22 sections of it and blew it up and sent those to Pendleton. It was a 1920s 21 photograph. And they recreated all those in the colors they had made in the 20s from the Osage, along with the 1920s Pendleton label. So it was so vast. I couldn't do it like I did Social Network, which was smaller, a big story, but a smaller venue.
I want to say that just I wanted to talk to our viewers a little bit to explain is like oftentimes when we are working in costume, right? Costume designer like Jacqueline will set up a space, right? There's a space to work and like everyone's coming. And I thought it was cool because it was very unique of Jacqueline in the sense to try to make her workspace feel or take on or encompass the film, right? It just feels, it's like an artist's dream. It felt like being enveloped with another artist where you're just working and it was fun. So I always bring that up because I just still remember that. You know,
it helps the actors when they come in to be immersed. Our dressing room, we put Pendleton blankets on all the furniture, and there were pictures of Molly's. You know, we had I got from Jack Fisk of what her house probably looked like, and we tried to decorate our fitting room that way, and have a lot of pieces that were traditional Osage pieces sitting around that you could get the feeling. You know, I did that for the non-Osage actors too, like for Leo and Robert and Jesse Plemons. And I tried to create a little, Texas Ranger scene for him. And we tried to do that just because their costume fitting is really the bridge for the actors, from the actor to the character. Mm-hmm. It's the first place they really start feeling the actor, because they're putting on clothes from another period. And if you do it right, they stand differently, they behave differently. They if they're big talkers, they'll get quiet, like their character. It's amazing. It is a first place, and I feel if I can give the writers the right hook, they start really feeling their roles.
When we brought it in, we went.
Really good. These were really good actors, so I didn't have to do too much.
But... Oh my gosh, we have to talk about that too. The performances in this film were incredible.
Incredible.
I really felt transported. But before we go there, I want to kind of pull it back a little bit and say, we talked about, or you were talking about research, right? So with Julie, can you kind of talk about that a little bit and like how you approach research in general? Because you had the walls covered in research just as a designer. Like when you're going into a project that has such a massive amount of research to do, like what's your thought process on that, or how do you start?
Well, I read the script. I always start by reading the script about 6 or 7 times. I learned that from a book I read about Edith Head when I first started. You have to know the characters from the inside out to dress them. And then you're really just taking them shopping in the period that they're in, keeping in mind who they are in the script, what their economic, situation is, basically who they are. And then they kind of buy their own clothes, or pick their own clothes. And then I make closets for them. But first I read the script many times, and then I get an idea about the character. Let's say Hale, Robert De Niro's character. There were pictures of him online. And plus I'd done another movie with Terrence Malick in Oklahoma, because Terry had grown up there. And I went to Woolarock, and Frank Phillips was a big rancher there, and he had a lot of books, and there were a lot of pictures of him with his crony rancher friends. And I got a really, aside from the like the kind of smoking jacket we first see Robert De Niro in, I saw a picture of a rancher sitting by his fireplace in a smoking jacket like that. And I reproduced it because you get some hints to the character, but you don't know their entire closet for all the different scenes they're going to be in. So you start just in your head amassing research for that character. And then for the Osage, there were, like Molly's family, there were a lot of studio shots of her and her sisters. So you could kind of get a sense of, by the little things, that the shoes each one of them was wearing, or a handbag one of them was holding, or the blankets they were wearing, or how modern their clothes under the blankets were. And then the Osage, I watched a lot of home movies. They were at $1,800 a minute. The Osage, aside from the royal family in England, were some of the few people in the world that could afford home movies. And they documented themselves because they could afford to, riding in their planes, practicing archery, going to Eastern schools, playing football. So it was beautiful research for all the football uniforms I had to make for the movie. They were wool. They were very specific of that time period. So it was a lot of home movies that the Osage fortunately made, not knowing that how I was going to use them 100 years later, right? But I really did rely on, I did tons of research. I couldn't leave for Oklahoma for 4 months because of COVID. So I sat at my house in Deadwood, and I watched a lot of 1920s films, one of them being The Winning of Barbara Worth. It was 1926 by Henry King, and it was fabulous references for both. Ronald Colman I used very heavily for William Hale, and Gary Cooper for a lot of Leo's wardrobe when he's, his casual wardrobe.
There was a lot of, just in like recalling it now, and you're talking about the different characters, I have to ask, texture. There was so much texture in the costumes in terms of like the different characters and how you played them off of each other, and color palette. Was there anything specifically that you were thinking about for each one to kind of delineate them? Because it feels very visually, they all feel like themselves, but when they're on screen together, they have their own cues. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Well, like I said, once you get to know the character, they're individuals, and then you dress themselves, you get a sense of their their inner self, and people pick clothes based on who they are. So they're different because they're really different characters. And the color palette, I really didn't have a lot in mind because I was looking at everything in black and white. But I really had to like make up the color palettes. But Pendleton did something interesting. They had colors that they made their blankets in the 20s and sent me a beautiful palette of all the blanket colors. Like the scene you liked of all the sisters sitting out on the blankets is one of my favorite. I paint, and I want to do this as a painting because I just love this of all the sisters.
Beautiful. It's
and
wonderful.
Just the whole palette, I wanted to keep it like black and white, but in color, without anything popping too much, so that you get the feeling. We're so used to looking at this era in black and white that I didn't want the color to take over the character. And then Rodrigo did something really interesting. He shot the scene where Lizzie Q is taken away to heaven by her ancestors. And it's very heightened. It's like, real heightened. What was it called? Autochrome, or I can't remember the technique, but it was shot with very, bright color because it was an intensive scene, and it should stand out from her death scene, which was very muted and quiet with her daughters around her. And
that was that bright, where the ancestors were like in bright red, right?
Yeah. That's taken from a research photo of an actual Osage woman, very, very famous in their history, and the man. And they were taken to Europe. That the woman in the red dress is from a portrait in the Bodmer book from the Prince of Weed, Travels in America. And she was taken to Europe, and then kind of as to show Europeans the magnificence of the Osage, and then kind of abandoned there. And it was this city of Montauban that raised the money and got her back to her family back home. And I was so charmed by her story and how she got back to her family, and how now to this day, Montauban in France is the sister city of Pawhuska in Oklahoma, because they got her back to her people. They raised money and sent her home. And I thought it would be a great ancestor for Lizzie Q, who was a real traditional, grew up in the plains, catching, hunting buffalo, curing the skins. She was a plains woman. And I thought to go back to that time, the Prince of Wee, the early 1800s, for her ancestor, for both her and the man all painted red, would be a wonderful image. And I talked to Marty about it, and he loved it. And the Osage were really happy with showing that, their ancestors.
It was very artful, and it seamlessly, I think what was really great about it too is that it seamlessly blended into the film to where it didn't take you out of it, but you also got right away what was happening. Like, it wasn't like you had to, like, you're like, wait, what, where are we? It's like, it was very clear. This is the time, and she's going, and like, it was just really well done. And I like that it has a double, like a meaning. Oftentimes, like, cause I teach a class on concept art, right? And costume, right? And what you're saying, it's like, there's a level of, with costume, it's like, I always tell the students, like, you can't dress this person if you don't know who they are or where they come from, right? So you can't, otherwise it just becomes kind of visual, and it's not something, it feels basic, or it just feels not grounded somehow.
It doesn't feel real.
It doesn't feel real, right? There's something about it where it comes off as like disingenuous or something. And in this film, it felt the opposite, where I could tell you really were living with these people, but then also, like you said, the kind of having that color palette in black and white, I could see that when I was watching it, in the sense that it felt vibrant and it felt lively, because we're used to seeing it in black and white, but nothing stood out too much to where you're like it felt like we were dropped in this place in real time, and like we're experiencing it the way that it was. And I think that that's a testament to your art history as well, and like the fact that you really settle yourself in the moment, and then try to kind of like design from the world out. It's very artful. I think that that's the best way I can describe you whenever I talk to you, is like, it's just artful. But there's also something that's really fun about it too, which is, I want to talk to our audience in the sense of, it's a job. There's a job in there. There's an actual job in costume design. And Jacqueline does it very well, in the sense that there's the art side of it, and then there's the side of it is like the research, the history, the learning, like reading books, looking at paintings, looking at the way people lived, like, and that to me is the funnest part about costume design, is like, each time you're transported to this new place and you get to like
time travel.
Yeah.
I love doing period film, because I feel I get to time travel. And when you're with a really consummate director, I've worked with some, and Marty's probably the king of that. You walk onto a set, especially a set that Jack Fisk has designed. I've done 9 movies with Jack Fisk. You are transported. First time I really ever felt that, I think, when I was doing Henry and June with Phil Kaufmann in 1920s Paris, and I walked into the Brasserie de Lilas, and I could feel Hemingway sitting at the bar writing The Sun Also Rises. I felt transported to another time. And I felt that on all the movies I've done with Jack Fisk, walking onto the fort in 1604, Jamestown. I felt like I was time traveling. And I think that's the most thrilling thing for me about the job I do. And Marty, you feel that on his sets. The whole mood is, you're transported, and it's such a wonderful, wonderful career in that respect. Where do you ever get to do that? You can do it when you read to an extent, but it's when you're surrounded with all the furniture and the memorabilia and the right clothing and everything, and you walk on and you feel, okay, this is it. This is right. It's the most rewarding thing you can feel.
I love it so much. And I think that we were talking about it a little bit before, and I want to bring it up now, which is your collaboration process in terms of collaborating with directors like Marty and others. I tend to feel like you're a master collaborator in the sense that you kind of get in there and you kind of find this like this perfect melding of all those artistic mediums with production design and all of it, right? Can you talk about like what you think makes a good collaborator, or like how you feel like that's a part of the process?
Well, I always pick my films. I was picked on this one by Marty, and I was so enchanted by that because I never dreamed I'd ever get to work with him. And once he hired me, my husband said, "Okay, you can quit now.
Yeah.
This is it." But I always show the director everything first. And I love their reaction because they have lived with the film longer than any of us. They've hired us all, they put their team around them, but they have been living with it a very long time when you get to finally meet with them and show them things. And Marty has this wonderful, it's almost this young man enthusiasm about stuff. He's like he gets excited like a kid, and when you see that level of excitement, when you show him something, then you feel okay about showing the actors because you don't want to, he has a vision, right? That he's lived with, and you want to give him his vision, especially someone like Scorsese that's such a student of film and has all these incredible favorite movies that he loves, and you want to make it, give him what he's seeing. But you also don't want to throw something in an actor that's not, that isn't right, or that Marty hasn't seen, or you really want them to feel that they have the approval of their director, and that they're going to show up on set being dressed in a way he agrees that is right for the scene. So that's kind of my collaboration process. And then like with Leo, I had worked with him on The Revenant. So I felt I had a shorthand with him. He's not just a handsome man. He's an incredible actor. Incredible. People don't think of him that way. He's a method actor, and he really puts on something that he's going to wear in the scene and does the scene and lets you know if it feels right. And, Jackie, maybe I won't wear my jacket on this one, or I love these suspenders, and I can kind of play with them. He's a real collaborator, and I just loved him on The Revenant and on this movie. And I actually go on his trailer and he puts the clothes on that I have the idea, and he wants to know why I came up with this outfit for this scene, because he had a lot of different changes because there were a lot of different moods in the scene. Some pajamas, home with his kids, in bed with Molly, riding around doing robberies with the boys, and many different levels he had to look right for the scene in that. I would go and talk to him about why I'd made that choice for that scene on his trailer. And, sometimes he'll say, "Oh, I love this, but can I lose the jacket? Or maybe I should have that jacket that I wore in the other scene for the scene," And I love talking to him about it. He's so smart and so good with clothes and with the choices. And then I had a consultant on this movie. I've never worked with a consultant before. And that was wonderful because what Julie O'Keeffe did was she brought me the best artisans in the Osage Nation. So people that felt this story and they had family members who were killed and who lived through the Reign of Terror, they could be part of telling the story. And they brought me wonderful things that I could either borrow or copy or actually use in the movie. That were actual pieces from them that we, Julie arranged a wonderful, with one of my assistants, she arranged this wonderful trunk show where it was COVID. So they would drive through the parking lot of the airport and I would stay on the loading dock and they would open up their trunks and show me things they were willing to share with me. And we had to carefully photograph and tag everything. So they got everything back. And it was a wonderful process. And I loved my collaboration with her. I'd say if anyone doing a movie like this with a native nation, to have somebody who really understands the subtlety, because you can look at 100 photos of women in blankets, but what I learned from Julie is in every situation you would wear your blanket a different way. There's 6 ways to fold that blanket, and you don't see that in a photograph because you don't see what they're doing. So that meant the world to me, having her. They told me I could have her for 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, I said to my supervisor, get her for more.
Yeah, we need her the whole time. I'm a big proponent of, diversity, inclusion, equity, all of those things. And it's for this exact reason. So I want everyone paying attention or watching to understand that what Jacqueline did with Julie is something that's necessary, especially to be culturally authentic, is to allow people to tell their story, right? To allow them to be the voice that can come in and tell you, because it only makes the art better, but it also makes it more authentic. So I really appreciate you having that collaboration and also kind of championing it, because there are so many times when we do things that are culturally specific where we can get them wrong, and not by, it could be the best intention, just by not having someone in the room to say, that's not exactly how we would do that, right? So that's really helpful.
Important to Lily Gladstone. Let's talk about a fabulous actress in Lily Gladstone. But she really trusted me because I had Julie there, to go to her trailer every day and bless how she was wearing her blanket, or what she had on, how her wabankas were put on her blouse. I had Julie go and actually, kind of bless her wardrobe. She would wait till Lily came back from the rehearsal, and she would say, we'd go to her trailer together, and Julie would say, what are you doing in this scene? Because it was closed rehearsals with Marty and the actors. And she'd say, oh, I'm doing this, I'm combing my mother's hair, and she said, well, then you would fold your blanket over this to free your arm. It was like very, very, very specific. And Lily loved that. It gave her this, and then Marty didn't have to think about it. He knew that if Julie was there blessing everyone on set, I had my dream team on this movie, dressing the background, not just the Osage, but dressing all of the non-Osage background. And it's 2 people that I've done many movies with. I have to give them a shout out, Monica Haynes and Joe Chigliano. They are genius. I think the background in this movie is some of the best background dressing I have ever seen in the movie. And I'm not blowing my horn on this.
It's noticeable.
They're my dream team.
This was very noticeable because watching it, especially knowing that I was going to talk to you, I was really paying attention to costume and texture and color and all those things. But I was also paying attention to the background, and there was not one half-stepped, there was not like we phoned this in because you're deep in the background. Everybody felt like they were genuinely there and came to play and brought their A game. It was incredible. So shout out to the both of them, because they did a great job. It was very noticeable, and it really blended. It just, watching the main characters along with the background, along with it just felt like a bunch of creatives all together, and everyone knew what they were supposed to do, but it felt real. I haven't felt transported like that watching a film in a very long time, because everything kind of feels, the filmmaking has changed, but this felt artful, it felt purposeful, and it was exciting. I was really kind of just it felt good to just sit in the theater and be transported someplace, and then know that everybody was really excited about telling this story. I had 4 really good assistant designers on this. It was massive. Yeah, please name them.
I had I'll try to do it alphabetically. Yeah. I had Christy Cham, Christy Hoffman, Amelia McKinney, and Tim Lonsick. They all did a great job.
Yeah, there was I could tell that you guys had a lot of work to do too, because there was so many different sections. And I was just noticing little things. There was a question that I had specifically. I don't know why this scene stood out to me, but it was the paddling scene. So I was just, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the movie, the paddling scene with Leo. And and I noticed his foods.
He loved his
boots. That's exactly it was. But when I saw that choice, it was a really interesting silhouette of a costume choice because it made him feel more vulnerable. Like it wasn't, it was like very slim and it was like, you're getting paddled today, right? Like, I wanted to know if you had a thought.
His butt looked like a little boy's,
Yes.
by his father.
Yeah, it felt like.
It was a choice. I picked that pair of pants because of how they fit him in the back.
Correct.
And I thought there was something so vulnerable and exposed about him. No jacket, because often he wears a jacket with those pants.
Mm-hmm.
But the cowboy boots I nicked from Tom Mix. Tom Mix lived in Pawhuska, and everything was bespoke because he was such a famous actor in that period, living in that town. So I figured that Leo would see his movies and watch and want to look like that and could afford it once he's married to Molly, right?
Yes.
And a friend of mine who owns Cowboy 2 in Belle Fourche, South Dakota, replicated those boots for me. I live about 7 miles away from Cowboy 2, and his name is George Wilson. He also, in his factory, he does a lot of rodeo, but his company's been around for many, many years. And same with the hats, and I'll get into the hats, but he made all the boots for the Osage because they wore a different style cowboy boot. If you notice in the movie, like Henry Roan's, they're different style than cowboys, because the Osage took a cowboy kind of look, mythology, but made it their own.
Yes.
Right. And so he made all the Osage boots because I couldn't find them anywhere. It's a Spanish heel with a very high rise, and that's so high as a rattlesnake can strike, because they were smart.
I was going to ask, like, I feel like riding boots, and I was trying to figure out.
Awesome. That's as high as a rattlesnake can strike. And then I had, and he made them all and put them all in his horse trailer with the Leo's boots, the Tom Mix copies. And he drove them all from South Dakota down to Oklahoma for me and showed up in his horse trailer and called me on my cell phone and said, Jackie. And I said, George, how are the boots coming? He says, they're done. They're outside. Look out the door. And there he was with his big Julie and his horse trailer, with a horse trailer filled with boots, probably 100 pair.
That's incredible.
And a friend of mine, it's been called the Hat Movie of the Year. A friend of mine named Jack Scholl owns Weather Hats. And Weather Hats has been a cowboy hat company since 1911. And they made hats for John Wayne, for Gary Cooper, for Tom Mix, for all the big cowboy films from the teens on, right? From the beginning of, probably all the hats for the John Ford movie. If you go to American Costume, she's got a lot of weather hats from all the different eras. And so my friend, he's actually my husband's friend, because we have a place in Deadwood, and my husband used to go to Belle Fourche, get him a coffee, bring it into his store, and keep him company where he was making hats. And just because my husband loved to be, he's a writer, and he loved to be around that whole cowboy mythology. And so his picture is in all the hats, all Leo's hats, all of Robert De Niro's hats. He's I can't show you because I just gave one of his hats to Marty last night with his picture inside. But he reproduced the hats from the research for me. He had all the blocks from, if you see the GQ magazine, it shows his studio. He's got all the blocks from the 1920s on to block the hats, and he uses real, the real beaver wool or whatever they call it, and he molds them and makes them just so perfect. They're like art objects.
Tell me how I wanted to talk about you making, because we've talked a little bit and you brought it up, COVID was a big thing during this film, right? Of the filming process of this, and like how you were able to kind of navigate around that. And also you were making, I guess, the suits with United American Costume. Were you doing that while doing Dune in Budapest?
Yes.
Explain that craziness. Just talk about how you were able to like work through that.
Diana's an old friend of mine. My first movie I ever did in Hollywood was Rising Sun, and there was a big karaoke video scene where I met Lester Bayless and Diana. And I've always wanted to do Jackie West Western. I didn't get to do it until Marty, right?
Yeah.
One Western scene in Rising Sun, and I met Lester Bayless and Diana. I used them. I used Lester's office. He let me use his house because I was living just in Deadwood at the time. He let me use his house in Valley Glen, and he let me use his office at American Costume all through Benjamin Button. So I have a long history with Diana. So I called her while I was in Budapest and asked her if she could possibly do some suits for this movie. And she said, oh, I have all of Lester's patterns, because Lester's since passed away. But Lester is in the Cowboy Hall of Fame. He was in John Wayne's contract. He had to have Lester Bayless on every movie he did after a certain point in his career. Diana always says she runs American Costume, that she grew up on John Wayne's knee. And she had all the patterns from the 1920s and made all of Robert De Niro's suits, because they had to look bespoke. This is a rich rancher, right? And you can't just go rent, a suit in his size at a costume house. They have to look new, like he could afford to go have his suits bespoke, either in Tulsa or in Pasca by a tailor. And she did the same for Leo. And she started the whole process early on. During COVID, we had to be tested twice a day to even be on set. Can you imagine that whole crew? But we made the whole movie right during COVID.
Yeah.
And I remember we bought a motorhome to drive with our dog down. We didn't want to stay in motels going to Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. We traveled from Deadwood right down. We took the path of the Osage from the Missouri, the fork of the Missouri down through Kansas into Oklahoma, just the way the Osage moved in their history. But that for me was really important, just seeing the lands they'd lived on before they got to Oklahoma and what was taken away from them, to help tell that story and give that level of, gravitas to it.
There's a tonal shift that happens in the movie that I want to ruin, but it was almost like you're going from, it's like you start almost with Leo and his perspective and his family, and then it starts to kind of go into the Osage, and then it's like you start getting enveloped in that and seeing the way the world is, and then it like just shifts, it just keeps shifting. But it was interesting because it felt like you really kind of like the Osage part of it felt so authentic and real, and it felt like you knew their travels, but then it also felt like it felt like there was a point in the story where you're humanizing with them and understanding where they are, and then it starts to shift and say kind of what happened to them in a very beautiful way. Can you kind of talk about like the tonal shifts and how you approach those?
I don't even know if I did it purposefully, Phil.
Mm-hmm.
It was a mood, Molly's clothes get darker as it passes, but when she's really sad and her sisters are being killed, you don't see her in bright, happy colors. When she's kind of when he's kind of courting her, their courtship, she's brighter and more playful, but she still needs a certain elegance and sternness when she confronts the awful guardian who's calling her an incompetent, and questioning buying meat. And so you have to go scene by scene. It wasn't so conscious, moving it. It wasn't I wanted each scene to feel natural. Yes. And you kind of pick your clothes on a given day by what you're going to be doing, who you're going to be talking to, how you want to come off, how you want to present yourself, with a certain, and she had a lot of pride in being Osage. That's why she stays traditional. So she would use her clothes to make a statement. Those blankets for Molly are not targets. Like one of her sisters says, these blankets are targets on our back. Mm-hmm. For her, they were armor, and it was her against the world. And I think she wears it like a coat of arms.
Very much so. It made her feel, even the way she walked and she stood in them, it made her feel really confident and very
And
proud.
powerful.
Powerful.
They're going to take her pride away because they're calling her an incompetent when she was an educated, intelligent, beautiful woman. Nothing incompetent about Molly Burkhart.
There's also a scene that I want to talk about too, because I noticed it and I was just like, that's so good. And I don't even know if you did it on purpose. It was Leo's wearing like an Osage print kind of like a jacket or something like that, but it's when he's doing the worst things. And it was kind of one of those things where I was just like, and then there's the dialogue of him like the wolf, the snake, like that. It was just like the wolf in sheep's clothing. Like that jacket to me was just like, I was like, you snake. Like it was just kind of, and I don't know if you did that on purpose or if it was like him, he doesn't even understand it that he's doing it, you know?
Well, first of all, the mink coat of the Osage were the Pendleton blankets.
Okay.
Those huge status symbols. And that's a real one from the 1920s. Very, very valuable. Mm-hmm. And you know this, Phil, one is none in a movie, right?
Yeah.
There's one of those jackets in the world because it's made from one blanket.
Right.
And I had those incredible cutter fitter on this movie. I've done several movies with her. She did The Revenant for me. Mm-hmm. And Leo helped me get her in, to do this. She came from Canada to do it. And she got a perfectly matched, all the Pendleton blanket print was matched out of one blanket. And he's a big guy, Leo. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those. But the idea was I saw a picture of Tom Mix wearing a jacket out of a Pendleton jacket, just around his house in Oklahoma. He lived in Pawhuska, so Osage County, and I loved him in it with the pants and the pants tucked in the cowboy boots and stuff. I just loved the look, and I showed it to Leo, and he loved it. Then I had to think of where he could wear that, right? Because I did a mannequin of him and showed it to Mark, pictured it. I didn't have Leo at that point; he'd gone away, and I wasn't going to have him for a while, so I put it on a mannequin his size and showed it to Marty. Marty loved it, and I knew Leo would love it. And I kind of talked to Leo about it before he left. And then I had to figure out where the best place. And I tried to make it a snaky scene like you talked about, because it's something Molly gave him and made out of a precious blanket that you wouldn't cut up.
Correct.
Unless it was somebody you loved. And the interesting part of this story is they did really love each other.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But he's manipulated and betrays her through manipulation because he's not that smart. He doesn't even realize he's being manipulated, but they loved each other. And at that point, she made him a jacket out of love and gave him this jacket. In my head, this is my backstory and how I presented it to Marty. And then the snakiest scene when he's, talking to William Hale about getting rid of her and getting her head rights, he wears it. And it's that whole cross intermesh of love and betrayal. So I really picked the scene for that jacket.
It was perfect because it was like at that point I was feeling all the emotions and I knew what was going on. And it was like, because that transition goes from him being not very bright, but charming, to then like them falling in love, and then you realizing what's happening and going behind the scenes and all that. And by the time he wears it, it just felt so inappropriate, but it also felt like, to a degree, to Leo's testament of his acting, it feels like he can't even see himself. Like he doesn't see what he's doing, right? It's incredible that scene really stood out to me, just because it was at that point I was just like, you can't wear that. You know what I mean? You don't get to wear that. And it was good. Yeah. But knowing now even more so, I didn't pick up on the cuts, meaning I picked up on it more in a visual. I didn't pick up on it in terms of like the fact that he had cut up this thing that you shouldn't cut to make a jacket. And that makes it even more disrespectful. It's a really nice moment. So thank you for that.
Well, I think I have another interview. I just noticed it's 12 o'clock.
Yes, no problem. I was going to say, let me cut it.
But I love talking to you, and I remember talking to you on Social Network and how I loved the interview then. You really are one of the best costume interviewers, but that's what you do, right?
Thank you so much. Okay, well, I want to thank Jacqueline West for being on the show today. I also want to thank our sponsor, Costume Rental Corporation. And I want to thank our founder and executive producer, Martika Ibarra, and co-founder, costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I want to thank our hosting partner, John Campea, and to all our viewers for tuning in. To make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel, tune in the audio version wherever you listen to our podcast. You can follow me, you can follow the host, and you can follow Designing Hollywood podcast show, and well as me on social media at Phil_Boutté. And we want to thank Jackie again for coming on the show and appreciate your time so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. Great interview.
Problem. Thank you so much. I'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And thank you to our very impressive sponsor, Costumes Rental Corporation. The variety of costumes at Costumes Rental Corporation is expansive. CRC is recognized worldwide as the premier supplier of military and police costume uniform rentals. Costumes Rental Corporation takes pride in its commitment to each customer, helping to produce the type of exceptional look needed for a successful production.